Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We got a lot to discuss because we are under 50 days to college football action. Abe Gordon, it's going to be here before we know it. And honestly, 47 days, I think, was your total number of days between now and college football. I'm just feeling some of that energy start to pick up because we're a week away from SEC Media Days, which is the unofficial start of the college football calendar year. We talked about Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC on our last episode, and all of the other conference realignment news that was coming out that was made officially official. We knew those teams were going to be joining those conferences for a very long time, but the news became official as they joined those conferences on July 1st. And now we got a packed show for everybody. This is going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to dive into some of the coaches that we feel are going to be feeling the most pressure entering the 2024 season. And since we're at a spot where we can start previewing the 2024 year, we're going to give you a wildcard team for every single conference. We've got a couple of names of schools that we think that might take off a little bit in 2024 and throw a wrench into the college football playoff. But before we do any of that, I got to welcome in Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, we're doing good, bud. Really starting to talk football, as you mentioned. We're looking at actual teams, what they could accomplish or fail to accomplish this year. So we're the countdown is definitely on.
Now, this is going to be a ton of fun. We're actually getting into the college football conversation and less of the speculation and the craziness of what could be. We're talking about what could be happening on the football field. And I think that's a lot of fun. But let's actually just jump right into this first topic, Abe Gordon. What do you say? We're going to go through. I'm going to name off a couple of coaches. You're going to tell me if they are or they're not on the hot seat. And I'm going to start down in the ACC. Mario Cristobal, somebody who, look, he came down to the University of Miami with a lot of acclaim, with a lot of pressure. A lot of people thought that he was going to bring the Miami Hurricanes back to the promised land. It looks like Mark Richt was going to be the guy to do that. Didn't end up being the case, but we'll see if Mario Cristobal can get the Hurricanes up over the top. They have a talented team. We saw the blue chip ratio came out a couple of weeks ago. They have all the talent in the ACC. They're probably one of the most talented teams, but they still have not been able to really show that on the football field. Last year, you had the whole debacle with the kneeing out the clock, and Tyler Van Dyke decided not to kneel it, or not Tyler Van Dyke, Mario Cristobal decided not to kneel it, and then we have the fumble, and then Georgia Tech comes back and wins a football game. And if he doesn't reach those expectations, you have to think he's on the hot seat, right?
No, I don't think so. Look, for every coach that we're going to talk about, there's like a level of like, my goodness, you can't keep them after that sort of season. So like taking out like some craziness where they go like 3-9, like if we're going to be realistic about some of these coaches and teams, and he's not the only one. I think based on some of the recruiting trends, based on some of the transfer portal, based on NIL usage, stuff like that, I think as long as it's not a disaster of a season, he's probably pretty safe, if we're being honest. I think he's kind of solidified it a little bit, where 7-5, 8-4 is kind of okay for him.
See, that's kind of where I disagree, just because he was brought in there to bring this team back to where it should be. A place that Miami hasn't been in at any consistent level for the last 15 to 20 years. It's a program that we know is fully capable of reaching those heights, but they reached, I think, number 2 in the rankings in the college football playoff back with Mark Richt when he had the one crazy year. But for the most part, this team has just fallen short of expectations, and Mario Cristobal might be just a victim of expectation rather than realities. 7-6 last season. You have a potential loss to the Florida Gators in 2024. That would be brutal if you lose to Florida, if you lose to any number of these other ACC teams. Of course, you're doing away with conferences and everything else. So, the schedule's not exactly easy. But if you have other ACC programs that continue to potentially pass them in rankings next year in the standings, I see plenty of situations where Mario Cristobal is terminated. It's kind of wild that we talk about Mario Cristobal leaving Oregon, going to Miami, and using Oregon almost as a stepping stone, and then Oregon seemingly upgrading in the process. maybe this is just a dose of reality for Mario Cristobal. But
well, the bigger issue for him, in my opinion, is the rise of Florida State. Because Florida State's doing what Miami is supposed to be doing under Cristobal. I mean, if Florida State doesn't jump into top 10 national title contention, those sorts of things, while you're also looking at the Florida Gators being down as well, maybe there's a different feeling for some of these state of Florida schools. But the pressure is on Miami. It is on Florida because of Florida State's kind of reemergence. And so I do think that ramps it up a little bit. Whereas, if Florida State was still kind of bumbling and fumbling their ways to 8-4 seasons as well, maybe it's a slightly different discussion.
It's just the size of the financial investment. I think of everybody, just about everybody on this list, I don't know of anybody who receives any more support than Mario Cristobal. I mean, it'd be very surprising if they do not at least start asking questions about him if he can't come together and put together a decent season. And look, you got a great quarterback under center this year, somebody who is going to be a little bit more free flowing, if you will, a little bit more electric in Cam Ward. It remains to be seen if he's going to be the guy who actually fulfills those promises of expectation. And I think Miami's going to be under the microscope again here in 2024. One other name, Clark Lay from Vanderbilt. Of all the programs on this list, there's no program that's harder to win at than Vanderbilt. This was a team that got up to 5-7 in 2022, but then came crashing back down to earth. I mean, the team has won at least 6 games in a season since 2018, and that needs to be a bar. That's your bar. Can they make a bowl game? And Clark Lay, of course, he has wild expectations that are in the opposite direction of what most of the other coaches on this list are. I mean, he came to SEC Media Days, I think 2 years ago, and he said that the goal is to win a national championship. And I remember people kind of chuckled at him and they said, Vanderbilt, like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not something that's realistic. But look, the dude has his eyes set on winning a lot of games, and it just hasn't materialized at Vanderbilt yet. And I just want to see this team in a bowl game in 2024.
Yeah, look, his average record over the course of 3 years has been 3-9. And I understand you're in the SEC. I'm not asking you to go out and surpass Tennessee and catch Florida. But you have got to be better than 3 wins a year. You're able to schedule a couple of teams that maybe you can get the one up on, and you've got to be somewhat competitive in the SEC. Again, getting to bowl eligibility is probably where this team is at. I think that's a fair ask. 1 or 2 conference wins a year, I think is probably where you're going to settle in at. And that might be the difference between bowl eligible and not. But not asking you to go 9-3, but you can't go 3-9 either. You certainly can't do it 3 years running or over the course of the average season that had your win total. So, I think there's definitely got to see an uptick of. I mean, if you can't get to 5 wins this year, that might be it.
Yeah, that might honestly be all she wrote. I mean, Vanderbilt's in a tough situation as it is, just being squarely in the middle of an SEC that's just long since passed them by in terms of competitive talent. I mean, Vanderbilt's flashed at times. I mean, back in the James Franklin era, this is a team that jumped into the top 25 at one point, and he, of course, parlays that success into a job at Penn State. And I mean, he's kind of been pretty much the same kind of coach over there with the Nittany Lions. And Clark Lay, I feel like, is a good coach. He's a coach that not a lot was expected of when he was there, and not a lot has really materialized. And they're in a tough situation now. They're finally getting a little bit of investment into the football program. You have, of course, the stadium renovations that are going on, and they were the butt of a lot of jokes last year because it was so slow, and they were still playing in that stadium, and it was just kind of an ugly scene. It was like you're playing on a construction site. And I'm just taking a look at the schedule here. I mean, like, you've got matchups against Virginia Tech, your Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky, LSU, Tennessee, and Texas. That's about as brutal of a schedule as there is in the SEC. I know that the next person on this list might have something to say about that, but yeesh. Tennessee, Texas, LSU, Kentucky, Alabama, Missouri, and Virginia Tech. I'll just say them again. I don't know if you win a single one of those games. That means you have to be perfect in the other ones to win 5. I just don't know how it ends up being a positive result for Clark Lay at Vanderbilt. But the next name is also somebody who I have a hard time believing that they're going to find any level of success in 2024. And I mean, he signed back-to-back top 20 recruiting classes. Um, he's a coach who I think is a good coach. He's just somebody who has not been able to get the job done down there in Gainesville. It's Billy Napier. Uh, you got another difficult schedule this year. You've got trips to Knoxville. You've got a trip to Austin, Texas to face the Longhorns. You're going to Tallahassee for the Sunshine State Showdown. It's the Anxiety Bowl against Miami. And then, of course, you have the world's largest outdoor cocktail party against Georgia. This is going to be a brutal schedule. And if you just look at the last 5 games of the season for the University of Florida, that might just by itself be the most difficult schedule in the country. But Billy Napier, work is cut out for him down there in Gainesville.
Yeah, it is. But I also don't think he needs to take the biggest step in the world either. Obviously, you've got to get to bowl eligibility. You got to find a way to get to 6, maybe even 7 wins. If you can do that with this schedule, though, the expectations I think are realistic. I don't think you have to be 9-3 this year for Florida, but you can't be 4-8 or 3-9. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know how good this team's going to be. I really don't. It's one of the bigger mysteries coming into the season. And ultimately, I don't think it's a mystery to the point where it'll impact the national title race. But I have no idea if this is a team that can put a scare into the likes of Tennessee and LSU and Miami and Florida State, or if it's a team that's going to get throttled by a bunch of these teams. So it's going to be very interesting to see. There's definitely potential that Napier gets the axe pretty quickly this season. But I do think there's potential for him to stabilize as well. And you mentioned the recruiting. He's got a 5-star quarterback sitting in the wings waiting for whenever Graham Mertz is done. And he continues to pull in top talent. So it'll be interesting to see where the decision goes. But winning just a little bit will go a long way for Napier keeping his job this year.
If this Gator team wins 5 or 6 games, maybe let's just say 5, and they have a lot of close results. Like say they finish tight contests with Tennessee and in Georgia and Texas, and they end up losing those games, but it's close. Like, do you think that's a situation where he can keep his job, or is this?
I think there's potential. Yeah, I think there's potential for them to miss a bowl and him keep his job, but you're setting it up the right way. It has to be about how it looks and how it feels the program is trending. Also, in that situation, do we see a little bit from DJ Lagway? Do you keep Billy Napier an extra year to prevent Lagway from transferring and to hold a little bit of momentum in that realm? It's a couple of different things.
So would you say the eye test is more important than wins and losses potentially?
No, the record matters, but I think you can defend the record if it's a bad one by the eye test. You could look great, but if you end up with only 3 wins, the eye test isn't going to matter.
Yeah. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. But one team that does need a little bit more than just an eye test is the Arkansas Razorbacks. I mean, Sam Pittman is somebody who a lot of folks expected was going to be fired last year. Instead, they just hire one of the guys who came before him and Bobby Petrino to be his offensive coordinator. But this is a guy who inherited one of the worst programs in college football at a time. Chad Morris was a disaster over there in Fayetteville. And Sam Pittman looked to have turned it around for a little while. I mean, he had Arkansas up there competing and beating Texas and competing in a stacked SEC West, was never really able to get it over the hump. But this was a team that was living in the top 25 here for a little while. And you have KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders. And there seemed to be some direction, and fast forward to where we are now, those guys are in the transfer portal. And now you've got a Boise State quarterback and Taylon Green who's coming in to run the offense with Bobby Petrino. Maybe that ends up sparking some sort of offensive resurgence, or maybe not. But this is somebody who I feel like is one of the most likable coaches in the SEC. But it's one that Arkansas is a proud program. I think that they're realistic about where they are in the conference, but what they've seen in 4-8 finishes in the SEC is just not enough over there in Fayetteville. That's not enough to get the Arkansas Razorbacks comfortable with where they stand with their coaching staff. How hot is his seat right now?
It's among the hottest in the country. I mean, it took everything in that program to bring him back this past year. I mean, there was days when it looked like he was going to be moving on, and then there finally was an announcement that they were retaining him. You hire a guy that can obviously lead the charge if they need to make an early change. Never hire your direct replacement. That's the moral of the story there. It's among the hottest, if not the hottest, in all of college football. So. I was surprised they did bring him back. They did, and now we'll see where it lands from here on out.
Yeah, he's 1-7 in the SEC last year, 4-8 overall. Just a really tough spot. I mean, 39-36 win over the Gators, and I mean, it was a tough year for Arkansas. And I'm like I said, I was a little bit surprised that he was retained last year. It just seemed like one of the shoe-in sort of decisions over there. But I mean, he's going to get another opportunity. He's somebody who I know at SEC Media Days next year is going to be one of the more interesting people to talk to. I mean, he's always been kind of a fun guy. Having met the guy several times. I mean, he's a dude who just kind of enjoys his life, and he knows that he can go get a cold beer at any time, and that doesn't really cost too much, so he can always go do that. Next guy on this list is we're going to head outside of the SEC and the ACC. We're going to go to the state of Texas and Dave Aranda from the Baylor Bears. And felt like a home run hire when he was first brought in. And I mean, this is a guy who's not far removed from a 12-2 finish. But 2 7-loss campaigns sandwiched that 12-win season. And I'm expecting a little bit more from Baylor, especially in a new look Big 12. But I don't know how hot his seat is necessarily, but when you're brought in to be a defensive mastermind and things don't necessarily go your way in that department, people start to ask questions.
Well, a couple things. I think the fact that Texas and Oklahoma are leaving the conference probably helps him out, an opportunity to be a little bit more competitive in that conference. I do think his seat is pretty hot. I mean, if you take away that 12-2 season, like his record is pretty far below 500 with that one out, offset. So this is a program that was in the discussion a number of years running, even through some, program killing decisions and punishment and penalties, stuff like that. So it's a program that's been through a lot. I don't know if they're going to continue to give them a chance. I mean, again, bowl eligibility has got to be the minimum here, especially, again, with a winnable conference.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Aranda is somebody who is, I think, a very good coach. He's somebody who I think he can be a strong coach for the Baylor Bears. I mean, but when you also look at a guy who they could have hired in Joey McGuire, somebody who kind of has elevated the program just right next to him in Texas Tech, then things kind of look not great. They look a little bleak. But like to your point, like this is a program who did struggle with I mean, you have off-field issues that marred that program, and Dave Aranda came in there and he was a bit of a savior in that 12-win season. But people have quick memories, people they're quick to forget. And it's, what have you done for me lately? And Aranda needs a bowl game in the worst possible way. But speaking of somebody who needs something in the worst possible way, I kind of I tipped my hand there just a second ago. Ryan Day. He's the last name on this list. I don't think he's on the hot seat at all. People like to think that he is. I know we've discussed this on this podcast. We started off the offseason talking about that very topic. But if he goes out and he loses to Michigan, what then?
Well, then he's fired. He's absolutely is on the hot seat. You're not losing to that team 4 years in a row, especially not in 1 year in which they won the national championship, in which you were probably favored to win it. Certainly not in which they lose 30 however many players it is to the NFL. Replace a head coach who's also left to the NFL and have a ton of questions. It's one thing to have lost to Michigan last year when, it's two of the top 3 teams in the country. It's going to be a whole different thing if they lose to Michigan this year. considering the state of that program. I think absolutely. I'm not saying Ryan Day is, national championship or bust. I don't think that's a fair crown to put on him either. But you can't lose to Michigan again. I think if he loses to Michigan this year and it costs them, and here's the weird thing with the expanded playoffs, right? You could theoretically lose to Michigan, still get in the playoffs, and you see what happens there. But yeah, if he loses to Michigan, I think you do consider it. I mean, the way that he's had the level this program is at, to not be able to get over that hump 4 years running, if that would be the case, it's as fireable as anything else we've talked about today.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, it's like you said. So you could theoretically lose to Michigan, win every other game on your schedule, go play in a Big Ten championship game. In this case, you could still play against like an Oregon or something like that, and win the Big Ten, and then make a run and win a national championship game. That's why I don't think that's the only thing on his resume that counts. And that's why I don't really have him on the hot seat necessarily. Like if he loses to Michigan and that derails his season in such a way that they lose a Big Ten title game, or then they don't win a national title, I think it ramps up if and only if he loses to Michigan. If that happens, then he would have to lose another game somewhere else down the line. If he loses 2 games next year and one of them is Michigan, he's not going to be the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes next year. Because there is an expectation that you beat the team up north. That's just what you're expected to do. And losing to them 3 years in a row is terrible. Losing to them 4 years in a row is completely and totally unacceptable. I understand where you're coming from. And I understand that I think they have like a countdown clock or something that's been going on for every day that they haven't beaten Michigan. It's been going. And every single day, those players have to come in and walk right next to it and see, we haven't beaten Michigan in almost 1,000 days or something like that. I don't know what it is at this point, but it's been a very long time, a very, very long time. And I think if that ends up being the case, yes, maybe he is on the hot seat. He's somebody who's feeling pressure. I don't think he's on a hot seat necessarily. And maybe we just agree to disagree on that fact, but that's really the biggest thing. Could he be fired next year? Yeah, sure. But it would take something just completely terrible happening in addition to, not something completely terrible. It would take something, like I mentioned, you have to lose to Michigan and you need to lose another game and derail your chances at a national title.
I'll take it a step further. If you lose to Michigan, you better win the national championship.
Yeah, well, that becomes the
you're putting way too many qualifiers. If you lose to Michigan, the only way to not be fired, in my opinion, is winning the national championship.
Yeah, because you're not firing him fresh off of winning a national title.
No, of course not.
Like that's not going to happen, and it's like, all right, you better get the job done against Michigan. But I mean, we talked about programs that receive the most funding or the most support. There's nobody, there are not a lot of places in America. I mean, you can make the argument that nobody in America receives the support that Ryan Day does. And all he had to show for it is 3 consecutive seasons where he doesn't show up in the Big Ten title game, doesn't even make an appearance, loses to Michigan, and he has 0 national championships on his belt. So, I mean, there is pressure. There's always pressure when you're the head coach of a program like that. Like there's always an expectation of a Kirby Smart, of a Nick Saban back when he was at Alabama. There is always an expectation that you go and get the job done. There's always going to be pressure. Hot seat is a different thing entirely. But I like the way you said it. I mean, that's probably the accurate way to say it. He has to win a national title if he doesn't beat Michigan. And that's just where the buck moves. Let's move into one other thing, and I want to start talking like actual previews. So, Abe, what do you say we dive into a wild card team, and we're going to go start with the SEC, go to Big 10, Big 12, and then the ACC. And this is why I want to start in the SEC. It's because I think that there's one team in particular. You could point to Missouri. You can point to a non-favorite team like maybe Alabama. I mean, Alabama's not really a wild card. I just don't see that being the case. Missouri is a team that finished in the top 10. LSU is a team that just played in an SEC championship game just a year ago. My wild card team is going to be the Tennessee Volunteers, a team that lost 4 games last year, a team that was a number 1 ranked team in the college football playoff poll at one point. back in 2022. They are a quarterback away from being a truly elite program at any given moment. And they have that transcendent quarterback, or at least they appear to, in Nico Amaleva. The guy has all of the tools to be a beast of a quarterback, but I think it's the number one thing about him is his processing. He makes a lot of really good decisions. He does, and he has the physical tools to throw the ball down the field. He's very accurate with the football, and he gets it out there on time, and that's really the biggest thing. Hendon Hooker was a great quarterback for Josh Heupel for one reason. It was because he was able to complete passes and stay ahead of schedule. That's something that Joe Milton wasn't able to do on a consistent basis. You talk about somebody who had all the physical tools. Joe Milton is that guy. He could throw from his knees 70 yards down the field, but it doesn't matter because he's throwing interceptions and he has incomplete passes to just racked up on him. I think Nico is the kind of guy who can consistently keep the Vols in play. And then on top of that, you have a strong rushing attack that's always going to be there. Josh Heupel loves to run the ball. He's a run-first type of guy anyway. And the biggest question mark is who steps up alongside of Squirrel White. Squirrel's going to be one of the probably an all SEC type of wide receiver next year, but maybe Brew McCoy or maybe Chris Brazzell from Tulane, maybe they can step up there. But I think that if they maintain that consistency on the offensive line and Nico can take those steps necessary, going from a true freshman that played a couple of games and flashed some promise to becoming an actual bona fide starter in the SEC than Tennessee, they're going to come crashing into the college football playoff.
Yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily what you mean by wild card team, but the way I'm going to approach it is who I think are the top contenders in each conference and kind of look beyond that, who could throw a wrench into it. And I'm actually going to go to Alabama, and it might be a little bit surprising, but there is this thought that they're going to take some sort of a step back. And I just wonder if Jalen Milroe returning and Kalen DeBoer in his first year can continue to maximize what they figured out from Milroe at the end of last year. Look, they played Georgia at home. They do have to go to Tennessee, to LSU, to Oklahoma. They get Auburn at home. They don't get Texas. That's the one that we're missing out on. But, you know, if I look at Georgia and Texas as the two contenders to win the SEC on paper, I kind of do wonder where Alabama is into this, because they are coming off as a shock victory in the SEC title game and a college football playoff berth. I just wonder if Kalen DeBoer's first year actually could go better than many people are expecting. And at least in 1 year, the drop off from Saban to DeBoer, with a lot of Saban's players still involved there, isn't that massive.
No, I don't think it's going to be super big. I think they're a very interesting team, but it's mostly I don't have them as my wild card team for one specific reason. It's just that they're Alabama. And
if I had to go elsewhere, because I thought you might say something like that, and I won't go deep into it. If I had to go elsewhere, it would be Missouri. What can they do to run back what we saw from them last year, both from the quarterback position? There's obviously no more Cody Schrader running back, but that defense traveled as well. And so I would just say, what can Missouri do for a secondary performance, a follow-up to what we saw last year?
Yeah, I mean, Cody Schrader, I mean, you've got one of probably the top wide receiver in the country in Luther Burden on the outside lining up out there. So I think they're going to be a really fun team. I mean, how do they follow up? How does he follow up on Eli Drinkwitz follow up on a top 10 finish? I mean, this is a team that honestly was a bit disrespected for much of last season. And I mean, they played really, really well. It wasn't really until they dominated Tennessee last year that I think a lot of people gave them their flowers. And I really liked what I saw from Missouri last year. How do they follow that up, though? Ole Miss is one. Like, can they finally get over the hump? They don't have Alabama. They do have a road trip to Georgia again. But can they follow it up and actually take that next step? I mean, we have Lane Kiffin is upgraded in the portal. They went deep into the portal to go get a lot of like big time game wrecking players. And Ole Miss is a team that's really interesting. And I think the SEC is going to be a lot of fun next year, because you have the Georgias and the Texases and the Alabamas and the teams that are kind of your prototypical ones. And I'm not saying Texas is your normal one, but they're a team that you expect to be at the top of the conference next year. But then you have guys like Ole Miss and Missouri, and like those are teams that could make their way into this tournament. And I mean, it's fascinating to see who's going to be at the top of the SEC next year. And there are a lot of teams who can be very, very good here in the 2024 season. Moving up to the Big 12, you could say Penn State or Michigan or Ohio State, of course, is your overwhelming favorite. But I'm going to go to the old Big 10 West with Wisconsin. Luke Fickell's entering year 2. He is a. Would you rather have experience or talent? Like that, I think that's really the biggest thing because the Badgers are returning a little bit of both, and they have 15 starters coming back, and then they added Tyler Van Dyke in the transfer portal. That's somebody who I think has flashed a lot of talent at times. I mean, he's been a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde, but the sort of up-tempo, quarterback-friendly offense that Luke Fickell's going to run, I think is going to do Tyler Van Dyke a lot of favors. I mean, he's somebody who, on his bad days, he has 11 turnovers in 4 games, and he gets benched. And then on the good side, he's throwing for 600 plus yards in a game or in 2 games, and he throws multiple touchdowns. I mean, and no interceptions. He has no turnovers. I mean, that's the kind of roller coaster that Tyler Van Dyke is on. But I think Luke Fickell, if he's able to provide some of that, help him bring some consistency, I think that'll do him some wonders. Because the rushing attack is going to be pretty good. They got some guys here in house they're going to be pretty solid for them. The defense is going to be fine. I don't think it's necessarily going to be world beater. But Luke Fickell in year 2, I mean, he was able to take Cincinnati from a 2-win team all the way up to about an 8-9 win team. Of course, now you're in the big bad Big 10 and a new look Big 10, and that's really a big question mark. But Luke Fickell is a damn good coach. And I think if you have a quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke who can sustain some consistency, that's a team that can look pretty good next year.
Yeah, I'm going to go into the new entrants into the conference, and I'm looking at Oregon. And obviously, they had a great run this past season. They had one bugaboo, and it bit them twice, that obviously being the Washington Huskies. But this is a team that you could argue has added. Obviously they lost a couple of players, but Evan Stewart comes in at wide receiver. But most importantly, you add a combo of Dylan Gabriel and Dante Moore at quarterback, and I do wonder if coming in with Dan Lanning, he's right there. You start to have that discussion. There's not too many names above Dan Lanning's right now. But I think this is a big challenge for them. And I'm interested to see how this transition goes because I think there's worlds where they slot in right behind Ohio State this year. I'm not necessarily putting them there immediately, but I think they could slot in there. And so I'm interested to see how Oregon's foray into the Midwest goes.
I love the pick of Oregon. I think Oregon has a chance to be a really good team. That's why I didn't pick them. I think that they have, they've got a lot of talent on that team. Dan Lanning's done a very good job of stocking it up on the trenches. And I think he's, of all the teams that are transitioning to a new conference this year, well, I shouldn't say it that way. I think Oregon is set up for success. He's got a program that's set up on the line of scrimmage. And I think that they're going to come in and find success pretty early. I think the Huskies are going to struggle in their transition. All the other teams coming into the Big Ten, I believe, are going to struggle. But Oregon is one in particular. They've got a stalwart at quarterback, a consistent sort of steady hand in Dylan Gabriel, somebody who's played big boy football before, and somebody who can come in and be a steadying hand for them. And I like what I see from them. The trenches are going to be strong. The defense is going to be very good. And Oregon's already won at Ohio State. Like, this is a team that they went on the road and got a big win there just a couple of years ago. And I really like what they have the chance to do this year. And if they come in and win the conference year 1, wouldn't that be just a brutal surprise, brutal, rude awakening for the rest of the Big Ten? But will it happen? I don't know for sure. The travel is going to be something that I'm going to keep an eye on. It's just sort of an unprecedented ask in college football, the amount of travel some of these West Coast teams are going to have to do next year. But moving down into the Big 12, this is going to be my first one that is a newcomer. That's going to be my wild card team. And I could pick Utah. You got Cam Rising there. I think he makes him the favorite in the conference alongside of Oklahoma State and Ollie Gordon. The running back, of course, he's dealing with some off-field issues that we don't want to get too deep into right now. But assuming that he is good to go for the regular season, then Oklahoma State's going to be one of the favorites in the conference to go back to a Big 12 championship game. And I think that the team that could come crashing in are the Arizona Wildcats. I mean, this is a team that the biggest win that they had, of course, they lose Jed Fish to Washington. He leaves for the conference after they win 7 straight games to end the season. They get their first double-digit win season in over a decade. And Jed Fish moves off to Washington. But the biggest win was getting Noah Fafita to come back to Tucson. And honestly, I don't know where they would be without him. I mean, we talk about quarterback play throughout the course of this list, and Noah Fafita might be the best quarterback of them all, and probably the least expected because, I mean, he comes in, he's a backup quarterback starting the year. He comes in for an injured Jaden DeLora, and he goes throw for throw with Michael Penix. He goes throw for throw with Caleb Williams in his first and second start. And then they win 7 straight games, have a chance to go play in a Pac-12 championship game by the end of the season. And then you throw in a McMillan, who is one of they create one of the most dynamic pairings of quarterback to wide receiver in the country. And they're both underclassmen right now. I mean, he had almost 100 catches last year for 1,400 yards and double-digit touchdowns. I mean, this passing offense is going to come in and be an electric group in the Big 12, a Big 12 that is ripe for the taking. And I think the defense is thin, but the offense, it'll be enough to really put the Big 12 on notice very early. And the biggest matchup is coming up September 28th when they go on the road to Utah. If they can go get a win there, the rest of the conference has to be on notice.
Yeah, I mean, look, since you didn't pick them, I think I have to pick them. The belief in this school that I'm about to name is not very high. But I just don't. I never really know what to expect. They've got some talent that are being projected into the NFL draft at a very high number. But overall,
this is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, how do you not? There's no bigger wild card in the country than Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes. And look, I'm not suggesting this is a team that's going to come upset the apple cart here in the Big 12. I don't think that's the case. But I don't know. I mean, another year where they have mass turnover in terms of transfers. If they can keep Shedeur Sanders healthy this season, I mean, who knows, along with Travis Hunter, what this team can accomplish. They're picked to finish near the bottom of the Big 12 conference. I tend to think that's a fair assessment of this team until we see differently. But whether or not they're winning games or not, they are going to be one of the major storylines in the conference. And so just because no other team really jumps up as like one I would throw a big asterisk next to, you kind of took the one that I would have gone with. So I'll see what Colorado's got in store for us this year.
I love the pick of Colorado. I like Colorado. They're interesting, but the defense was dreadful and it was abused consistently. And for as talented as they were on offense, they really didn't show up much on the stat sheet. This was a team that finished well outside of the top 75 in most every major statistical category on offense and on defense. They won 4 games last year, but they're going to get a lot of hype. And if they can start the season with a win at Nebraska and consistently build some momentum in the early parts of the season, it will be right back to where we were last year. Maybe this is the year that they kind of take off again. But I mean, I like Colorado coming back to the Big 12. I think that's really where they belong. I felt kind of out of place in the Pac-12, and maybe a return to familiar scenery for that fan base and that program can do them well. But I mean, I think they've got their work cut out for them. But we talk about quarterbacks, and Shedeur Sanders is as talented as just about anybody in the country. And if Travis Hunter stays healthy, I mean, who knows what we're talking about with him? I mean, they both have a chance to be first-round talents. And Travis Hunter, in particular, has a chance to be one of the top players coming out in next year's draft. I think they're, at the very least, and this is a good place to be, they're going to be very interesting next year. And that's more than I can say about some programs. Let's go down to the ACC. And a conference that as Atlantic in the name, but goes coast to coast. You got a lot of options here for the ACC. But I'm going to keep it on the East Coast. And I'm going to talk about a team that I think could end up being the Louisville of 2024, a team that played in an ACC championship game just last year, led by Kyron Jones, another resurgent quarterback. And it's the Virginia Tech Hokies. They had an identity last year, but only after Kyron Jones took over under center. And he has the ability to take games over with his legs, and that's a really important skill to have in college football. But on top of that, he can open it up downfield. And this is a team that by the end of the season last year, they were averaging 450 plus yards of offense. And that had everything to do with the quarterback play. I think next year they've got a dynamic running back in Tootin to match him in the backfield. And I like Brent Price squad. But the thing that I love the most about it is the very favorable schedule. I mean, it's out of conference. You're looking at Vanderbilt, Marshall, Old Dominion, and Rutgers to start the season. So you're what, 4-0 heading into your biggest road trip of the season at Miami. That's a winnable affair. And you win that game, you're 5-0 in the conference, and you're rolling. And if you're at that level where you're just picking up wins and picking up confidence, your two biggest hurdles in the ACC this year are at Miami in September and at home against Clemson in November. And I'll tell you what, if you get Clemson at home in November and you get Inner Sandman and the craziness up in Blacksburg, you got to at least give them a shot, right? And I like their chances if they're able to kind of continue rolling on that success from last year. Do I think they're one of the best teams in the ACC? No, I think they have a couple of holes that need to be addressed, but they have an identity and they have a favorable schedule, and it lines up pretty well for them.
Yeah, I'm going to give you two teams, and I'll keep it short so I can fit them both in. Miami, we talked about, so I won't go too in deep, but they're like the epitome of a wild card. It's a wild card at quarterback. I don't know what he's going to bring you. I know you still got Xavier Restrepo, who's one of the most electric receivers in all of college football. So I think Miami can slide in there. And the good news about them is we'll find out, right from the start in that game against Florida, exactly what they could present to the ACC. They're probably on the top end of, if things go well, they can compete for the ACC title. Another team that's just interesting and maybe less of a wild card in year one than it will be down the road is Syracuse. Fran Brown has come in and just stockpiled talent, both in the transfer portal and in recruiting. Again, I don't think they're year one going to compete for the ACC crown. But I am interested to see if they can set a path of upward momentum and where they could go from there. So kind of keeping an eye on them in terms of the bottom half of the conference as well.
Yeah, I really like Fran Brown. I mean, that's a team who the cupboard is not quite as dry as quite as bare as a lot of people expect it to be. Up at Syracuse, this is a team that I think could be pretty good, and Fran Brown's a good coach. He's a first-year head coach. But he's brought in some very strong assistants who I think are going to help him get to the promised land and potentially bowl eligibility in year one. We'll see if they can actually get up into a top 25 ranking at a consistent level under Fran Brown, but I'd like what he can do. But another team is Georgia Tech. I really like Georgia Tech. I think the offense is going to be better potentially because if Haynes King can come in and not throw quite as many interceptions, he had 16 last year, then the offense is going to return 1,000-yard rusher, potentially 2,000-yard receivers, and a quarterback who might end up being the best quarterback in the ACC next year. That means you're going to be pretty good. I mean, on offense, you're going to be good. But you have a new look defense under Tyler Santucci, the new defensive coordinator, and the schedule's brutal. It's bad, and the defense has to be better. It has to be better. You have a rush defense that was just one of the worst in college football. And you have a third down defense that's not able to get off the field. And if your offense is as good as it is and it doesn't see the field enough, then it doesn't really matter all that much. And then you have inconsistent approaches that see losses to Bowling Green and to Boston College. And both of those were double-digit losses on top of that. I mean, you need to see a little bit more consistency from Brent Key. And like I said, the schedule's tough. You're on the road at Georgia. You're on the road at North Carolina, a place ironically, where you've had a lot of success against the Tar Heels, but they have you circled on the calendar, and I'd be hard pressed to think that they'll sleep on the Yellow Jackets again this year. You're at Blacksburg, you have NC State at home, you have Notre Dame here at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and then you have Florida State to open up the season in Dublin. And don't sleep on Georgia State that week in week 1. So the week after Florida State, you're going to be coming back from Ireland. You're going to have a weird sleep schedule. Things are going to get messed up, and Georgia State has you circled on the calendar as somebody who they want to beat. So Georgia Tech's a team that I just need to see a little bit more consistency from. And if they can show a little bit of that consistency, then power to them. And they might be able to take over not take over, but have a successful season in 2024. But as far as wildcard teams go, any more honorable mentions that you want to throw out there?
I just think in the national picture, you've got a wild card in Notre Dame, and you and I have talked about this, and it's so easy to forget them because they are kind of who they are. But in getting the Duke transfer quarterback in there, it just feels like they can be dangerous, and maybe a chance for Marcus Freeman to have the kind of name-making season, if you will. I know he had a good one his debut year, but Notre Dame is one that gets very interesting, especially as we understand what they need to accomplish to get into the 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I think they're just about a shoe-in to make it into the 12-team playoff. Of course, it's impossible for them to get the bye. It's never going to be a reality for them just based off of not playing in a conference. But look, you go up and down that schedule. I think there are a lot of winnable games there. And with Riley Leonard under center, like you mentioned, I think they have a strong potential to turn into a pretty successful season. Very good poll, Abe. So that's why we're co-hosts, man. We a lot of good comes out of this podcast. We have a lot of fun here. But thanks so much for listening in. We are under 50 days to go until college football action, and we cannot wait. So make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow along for what remains of the 2024 offseason heading into the 2024 college football season. And we'll have you covered all offseason long. And then once we get into the regular season, it'll be a lot more fun there as well. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. This is the College Football Overtime Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you again right here next week. Thanks so much.